afternoon and welcome once again to Have We Got Planning News for You. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Hello too to our future YouTube viewers. Thank you for contributing to 1,000 UK YouTube subscribers now, which is fantastic. We're thrilled about that. As always, can I start by reminding you to consider making a charity donation in place of a registration fee. You know by now we support the NHS Combined Charities Just Giving page, as more important now than ever before, and Shelter. But of course, please feel free to donate to a charity of choice if you so prefer. We're thrilled this week to have an LPA Head of Planning as our special guest for the first time, and it couldn't be anybody other than our great friend of the show, Stephen Hunt, Head of Planning and Development, East Riding of Yorkshire, whose local plan won a prestigious planning award, where, as we'll hear later, there's a remarkably busy and varied planning caseload which hasn't let up at all during the pandemic. Stephen, hello, welcome. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. The usual questions. You can tell us where you're calling from. What I recognise that room. What you've chosen for tonight's theme, and what you're drinking.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invite. I'm calling from County Hall, Beverley. Usually we have about 1,800 people on site. Today there's been about 12, so it's significantly reduced numbers, and it is quite surreal. We have a couple of good microbreweries in East Yorkshire. Paul sampled one from the World Top Brewery just before Christmas. So I've gone for the Great Newsom Brewery. And this is a beer called Back Otchin. And that is the Yorkshire name for hedgehog, apparently.
Yeah. You learn something every day. Fantastic. Well, look forward to sampling some Yorkshire beers next week when I'm up there. Now, well, we're hugely looking forward, Stephen, to discussing all things local authority when we get to our session with you in the second half. I know we're going to talk about a wide range of things, including the local government response to the pandemic, your thoughts on the white paper from a head of planning perspective. Where do the planning fees go? What do you make use of them? All sorts of other issues. So really, really looking forward to that. Mary's going to be leading that interview in due course. As I say to all our guests, feel free to chip in on anything we're discussing before your session. And now it's time to introduce the panel. In a break with tradition, I'm going to start with our returned fallen knight. Paul, you're back with a vengeance, I see.
I am indeed, Charlie, although I'm not sure it's with a vengeance. Still feeling pretty ropey, to be honest, but it's a joy to be back, and apologies to have been laid out on the field on the last week. That was most entertaining. So in a different world, I would have been drinking some Pennine Ambler from Kirby Lonsdale, which is a fine golden brew. But given that I'm on day 7 of my isolation from COVID, I'm afraid I'm drinking water and taking paracetamol and all sorts of other things. But it's a joy to see you, Stephen. Happiness City, lad.
It's vodka, really, I'm sure. Well, welcome to the Antibody Club, Paul. Mary, you're back in the Cook Gallery.
Yes, I'm in the gallery. I'm in the gallery in special honour of our guest with my box of Yorkshire tea. Welcome, Stephen. I'm particularly glad to have someone representing the public sector and local authorities, and it's delightful to see you, and indeed Paul and all my other panelists. So good evening to you all.
Cheers, Mary. Chris, you seem to be in a cupboard or something.
Yeah, it's quite dark, and Henry's just walked in and taken my charger. Okay, so domestic life, eh? Yes, I'm very well. I've just finished a 3-hour case management conference. Wow, who knew there was so much you could talk about in a case management conference? But we had the whole Wheatcroft Amendment issue and all the rest of it. So that felt like a fairly full hearing today. I'm at home in Hogwarts with Presumption. Don't you see Presumption there? Get the light on me. He's got a flat cap. I don't know if you can see that. I couldn't find a whippet. I've got St Bernard. That's the nearest. But he's got his flat cap and his dog. And I'm drinking a Yorkshire beer that I know is a good one. This is from Masham, Yorkshire Gold.
Oh, yes, fantastic.
Absolutely fabulous. I've had an interesting week. I've been to the closest site to my set of chambers. So in Birmingham, we're in the city centre, and immediately to the north is the gun quarter. And I've never been to the gun quarter. I mean, why would I need to go to the gun quarter, right? And just about 100 metres away from my own Chambers, there's a redevelopment site, and it's been really interesting to see the gun quarter in Birmingham. That was a site visit this week, and generally all well, but still quite cold.
Fantastic. I just got a text from the inspector in your 3 hours case management hearing. So I can't believe I didn't tell him not to mention the standard method. 3 hours later.
We have a bit of that.
Sasha, how are you, mate?
I'm very well, thank you, Charlie. I'm in London. I'm reveling in England's 4th successive away test victory. And also I've got to pay compliments to the Indian performance in Brisbane. And what a great week for sport. I'm slightly worried that my 18-year-old son sent me a text outlining what he's going to watch over the weekend, which is Test cricket from Sri Lanka, a Big Bash from Australia, Arsenal on Saturday, Rangers on Saturday. You know, he obviously had a fantastic education. But welcome to Stephen, who I understand is a fan of Yorkshire cricket. It's glad to see there is someone left who still will publicly announce that they are such a thing.
Nice weekend. I've got 20
as well.
And York City, yes. Stephen's already fallen out with me because he mentioned the 2-1 victory over Arsenal in 1985 in a snowstorm. I'm still bitter.
Your weekend's going to be better. I've got 23 Lever Arch files of core documents to read over the weekend, but there we are. Well, Charlie Banner here. I'm wearing my East Riding cufflinks, bought from Beverley, to contributions to local economy. Mary and I did not coordinate, but funny enough, I'm drinking Yorkshire tea too. Shows great minds think alike. Hopefully, we won't get into as much trouble endorsing it on camera as Yorkshire's most famous MP, Rishi Sunak. I'm also eating, because I had a bit of a sugar craving, a Milky Bar, a supersized version of a Milky Bar. And there's a connection between the two. Because, and I can reveal a true fact here, Rishi Sunak was at school with one of the Milky Bar kids. The Milky Bar kid time. That is a true fact. I won't tell you how I know that, but it is an absolutely true fact.
What an extraordinary segue, if I may say so.
Absolutely.
That was pretty struggling. Can I just stop you there, though? Because both of you have got Yorkshire. I've got my first question for Stephen already, which is, where exactly are the tea plantations in Yorkshire? Just outside Ilkley? Why is it Yorkshire
That's
tea?
a very good point, actually.
Good question.
Yeah, good question.
It's
Like,
also I think it's probably thanks to Paul, our 46th Yorkshire themed episode. Long may that continue.
And
Now,
Chris, just east of Filey, you can't miss them.
Okay, good. I'll have a look for those.
Or somebody on the chat just said apparently it's blended in Harrogate. They're obviously famous for Betty's as well. Anyway,
Charlie, before we go on, can someone tell me where Yorkshire is as the Londoner on the show?
I think it's in Scotland, isn't it?
I knew, good old Stephen didn't rise. Of course, PT, the king of the north, took umbrage.
Now, the first case that we're going to cover this week is one that you're going to cover, Sasha, from the Court of Appeal.
Absolutely, and I'm going to redress the northern bias of this show by dealing with a case from the mighty borough of Brent. Now, Stephen's going to enjoy this. I'm talking about a decision relating to an unlawful use of a mosque on the Harrow Road, famously known under because of one of the great schools. You could walk from Marble Arch to Harrow School, which Paul obviously knows a huge amount about Harrow School, and we featured it in the summer. But anyway, Harrow Road I'm talking about. And this was a case for a mosque, an unlawful mosque. Worshippers started in 2012. And the reason that Stephen will like this, the good old days of planning, retrospective planning application made in 2012. And as Charlie, you've talked about one of your clients, I'm going to talk about one of my erstwhile clients, the magic London Borough of Brent, who determined the application made in 2012 in 2017. Who says we don't determine things quickly? So anyway, the planning permission refused in 2017, and an enforcement notice followed soon after, considerable period of time. An inspector determined that actually the appeal should win on ground A and granted consent under ground A for use of effectively the site for use of a mosque. Now, a local resident objected to that and took the point to the High Court, not unreasonably, that actually what was granted by the inspector was beyond the terms of what was lawfully open to him, because he granted a wider consent than effectively was sought under ground A, which the ground A was continued use of the mosque effectively, which was one part of the site, and the permission effectively granted was for the overall area. Now, I think that the recipients of the consent saw the problem. It was challenged in the High Court under 289. Effectively, the applicant saw the problems and did what we've all advocated, which is put in a section 106 remedying or seeking to remedy the breach of the inspector and restricting in a way the grant of consent under the ground A. But anyway, Mrs. Justice Lang didn't feel that would remedy the point of law, and effectively there was a breach of what powers existed under section 175 and effectively 1775, and effectively the decision of the inspector was quashed, and that went therefore to the Court of Appeal. And Lord Justice Singh, who all of us know is a very, very sound public lawyer and a very good judge, took the view that Mrs. Justice Lang was completely right, and it wasn't open in law to extend what effectively had been sought under ground A through the inspector's decision, and that was reiterated by the court. So the takeaway point is effectively inspectors and the grounds of appeal on an enforcement notice, you have to clearly, Charlie's just made me laugh because he's got a slightly different view, but I went out, Charlie. Good luck with your I think he's excellent, but let me just say that the clear takeaway is that you can't seek to under ground A to go further than what the enforcement notice alleged in terms of the breach, the subject of the breach. So a good reiteration by both the High Court and the Court of Appeal of a principle that is well established. That's my decision, Charlie. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. And that's a really important point, actually, that does come up fairly often in practice in enforcement cases. I'm next up, and I'm going to do with an EIA case called Finch, Surrey County Council. Now, there are a few certainties in life: birth, death, the fact that at least once a month we have a Yorkshire themed "Have We Got Planning News for You?" And the fact that whenever I cover a case on this show, it either involves me criticising the Court of Appeal or saying what a wonderful judgment Mr. Justice Holgate has produced. And it's the second of those that I'm going to be into today. The latest tour de force of Mr. Justice Holgate relating to a judicial review claim by a local resident to the grant by Surrey County Council of planning permission for the retention and expansion of an oil drilling site known as Horse Hill Well. Now, that claim alleged various breaches of the EIA regulations, and of course it's the regulations we now refer to in the brave new world post the completion of the Brexit process. And chief amongst the allegations was the complaint that the environmental statement didn't assess the environmental effects of the end product emanating from the crude oil at the site, which the claimant said were attributable to the project. Mr. Justice Holgate said this didn't amount to a legal error. He said that the true legal requirement in the EIA context is to assess the effects on the environment of the development for which permission is sought. The ES and the EIA can't be required to include effects which go beyond the effect of the project or development in question to something else later down the chain. And therefore, in his judgment, the scope of the obligation under the EIA regs to assess the environmental effects of a proposed development, and I'm quoting him now, doesn't include the environmental effect of consumers using, in locations which are unknown and unrelated to the development site, an end product which will be made in a separate facility from materials to be supplied from the development to be assessed. Now, if I may say so, and I would, wouldn't I, because it's a judgment to Mr. Justice Holgate, that's plainly right in my respectful view. Otherwise, an environmental statement would have to engage in speculation, which would necessarily be unreliable because you don't necessarily know where the end product's going to be. And it would be of little or no use to decision making and lead to absurdities. Would a strategic rail freight interchange environmental assessment have to guess what the environmental effects of the products whose distribution it facilitates would be? That's obviously too remote. So a very useful and helpful judgment to those involved in the IA process. And it also is useful in relation to scoping opinions. In the process of his reasoning, Mr. Justice Holgate made some important observations about scoping opinions and their relationship with an environmental statement. And he said the scoping opinions, the name suggests, but also under the regulations too, is only the opinion of the LPA as to the scope and level of detail of what's got to go in the ES. It doesn't fix or determine what must be provided in the ES, and therefore the mere fact in itself that the applicant produces an environmental statement which doesn't comply with a scoping opinion isn't of itself a legal error without more. So it's an interesting read for those dealing with EIA development and those concerned to understand what does and doesn't need to be covered, and dare I say also a good illustration that the EIA process isn't an obstacle course. Dare I say, those in DEFRA, if there's anyone in DEFRA conceivably listening to this, doesn't need completely ripping apart post-Brexit, because it's a process which might be improved, but the fundamentals are sound and the courts interpret it in a sound fashion. So that's my tuppence worth. Now, Paul, you're going to tell us about our first two appeal decisions.
Yeah, before I turn to the appeal decision, can I say the most important thing that I'm going to say on the show this evening, and it's directed towards Chris and said with love and friendship. It's Massam, not Masham.
Oh, okay. It's
a silent H. It's really, really important to get these things right in Yorkshire, trust me. Right, okay,
Mike corrected.
You might never get out of it alive if you ended up there. Right, okay, this is a decision of Inspector Gould on the 7th of Jan of this year in respect of a site in Tendring, and it was an application for 195 homes on the edge of Clacton-on-Sea, which had been refused for 5 reasons by Tendring Council, and was dismissed on appeal by Inspector Gould. Of the 5 reasons, only 2 of them were live by the time that it came to the appeal itself. That was an issue with regard to highways and an issue on character and appearance. And on highways, the appellants won absolutely hands down. Little wonder, because there was no objection from the local highway authority. So the real battle was the issue of character and appearance, and the fact that this was a proposal on the edge of a settlement. The inspector found that there were problems with the nature and layout of the scheme. It was a full application, not an outline application. So obviously the details were live at the time of the inspector's determination, but the inspector was deeply unimpressed by some of the shallow back gardens and the nature of the structural landscaping. But the reason why it's interesting isn't the particularity of the design of a full application. That's a matter that turns on its individual facts. What's interesting is how the approach of housing need was treated. This was a case where the plan was more than 5 years old, and if you used the standard methodology, it gave you 865 units per annum being required, and that only gave about, between 4.2 and 4.5 years supply. So standard methodology would seem to be the logical way forward, and no 5-year land supply. Well, the inspector didn't go down that route. The inspector saw that the local planning inspector had considered what the requirements should be, and the local planning inspector had delved into that fascinating subject. And I can see Chris getting excited by this, about unattributed population change and whether or not there are errors in the mid-year assessment. It doesn't get more exciting than that.
Really?
And the inspector said that no, there were errors, as a result of which he was reducing the requirements to 550 per annum, the consequence of which would mean that there was a 6-point-odd year supply, and therefore the council had a 5-year land supply. It was suggested, well, you can't go down that route. Well, the inspector disagreed, and the inspector said, no, having regard to paragraph 48 and the fact that it was overwhelmingly likely that that was going to be the requirement imminently, that he should use that for the assessment of 5-year land supply, and therefore concluded that the presumption didn't apply. It's a really interesting decision, because it's an interesting decision which, in my view, drags you back to good old-fashioned sensible planning and thinking about what the reality is of housing need, rather than necessarily the procedural nuts and bolts of housing need. So whilst it's an appeal dismissed, it's a thumbs up to Inspector Gould from me. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Paul. Fascinating stuff, and I suspect it won't be the last we hear of that subject. Now, Chris, you're going to tell us about an appeal in Leeds.
Yes, I am. I get the Yorkshire case this week. I had 3 very happy years as an undergraduate in Leeds, although I was dismayed to learn this week that Tetley Hall, where I was an undergrad, has been redeveloped for housing. Honestly, it's all that new student accommodation they're building. Miserable. Anyway, similar theme, appeal for housing in Leeds, and this is an unusual case. Viewers, 70 new homes in the village of Alton between Leeds and Wakefield. The local planning authority was represented by Stanley Bell, and they opposed the development, and the first reason for refusal was the public sector equality duty. Also opposing the development for the residents was the residents were the Save Our Homes L26 group, represented by Jenny Wigley, who, as we all know, is the Attorney General for Leeds residents everywhere. Now, why was it an unusual case? Well, it was a proposal for 70 new homes on a site with 70 existing homes. These are no ordinary homes. They're called Airy homes, designed by Sir Edwin Airy, for the Ministry of Works Emergency Factory-Made Housing Programme. And they are a frame of prefabricated concrete columns. I don't know if we've got a photograph of that, Rob. There we go. That's what they look like. Reinforced with tubing, recycled from the canvas tilt frames of military trucks. Wow, there's recycling for you in the 1940s and 1950s. Built in rural areas as a solution to easing the housing crisis in the Britain's conurbations. Wow, that all sounds like history repeating itself, doesn't it? Putting up prefabricated houses to solve the housing crisis. Well, the properties were owned and let by Pemberston Properties, and they'd been built for the National Coal Board in the 1950s to provide accommodation for miners and their families. The developer was represented by one Sasha White, who, as we all know, comes from a long line of coal miners. The inspector was Richard Clegg, and I have to say, I can't think of a more perfect choice for an inspector to deal with what is a series of relatively sensitive issues. The council's first reason for refusal, the public sector equality duty, and in particular, it was alleged that it would have been harmful on members of the local community with protected characteristics relating to age and disability. And information presented by Sasha's side and the LPA indicated in January 2019, at least 33 of the 70 households included persons with one or more characteristics. 12 were aged over 65, 3 with children, and 17 had a disability. So this was the reason for refusal, how they would be affected by this. 11 of the properties had protected tenancies, which meant they were going to be rehoused and actually as part of the development. So although they were concerned about it, they were going to stay. But the existing houses, the real issue was the existing houses were judged affordable. The residents considered them affordable. Whereas the new market has been difficult for the residents to acquire, and it would therefore create disruption in terms of moving home, and also maintaining their network of close contacts with existing neighbours at the appeal site. And the inspector concluded that most households, because of the price differential between what they could afford and Alton, which has become, a desirable commuter village on the edge of Leeds, would mean that they would be displaced from the area. And he gave weight to those with the protected tenancies, but gave significantly more weight to the 60 households without the protected tenancies who would need to move. And he said it would be, and this is interesting, harmful to the community with its own culture and discriminate against the more vulnerable residents. So his overall conclusion on page 6 was that the households on the appeal site comprise a strong, vibrant and healthy community. And paragraph 8B of the MPPF supports such communities. Paragraph 91.1 of the MPPF calls for healthy, inclusive and safe places, supporting social interaction. And he said that was evident here. So he concluded the proposal would have a damaging effect on the community of the existing residents. They were also non-designated heritage assets, and they were valued for their evidential value in terms of the prefabricated construction, if you can see that, which were part of the response to the housing shortage after the Second World War. And 26,000 of them had been built and assembled, as it says there. Airy was a local Leeds firm, and they were commissioned by local authorities to put them up, these ones for the mine workers of Rothwell Mine. The larger estate had been demolished, but he felt what remained was of sufficient size to demonstrate the form and type of the housing, and it created a pleasant appearance. But he did say the structural condition of the condition of the houses was also a factor. Structural intervention was required in all but 2 of the houses, and the residents suggested recladding, but the inspector said, well, that would diminish their historical significance as well. So he said it would inevitably cause considerable harm to the significance of the asset, contrary to P11 of the core strategy in Leeds, albeit he also took account of the fact that it was inevitable that they would need to be redeveloped. So we've got harm to the public sector equality duty and the effect on protected groups. We've got harm to non-heritage assets, but he also found, and this is really interesting, he found it, despite that, it was consistent with the development plan as a whole. If you see the conclusions, he said, comply with the development plan as a whole, despite breaches of several pretty pivotal policies. That was because he found it was in general conformity. Well, it was in conformity with the housing policies. Obviously, it's a brownfield site within a designated settlement. And also that it was consistent with the environmental policies, because obviously one of the main motivations for Sasha's clients doing this was so that they could get the houses into a condition that was suitable and energy efficient. So overall, he said it complied with the development plan, and he also took into account the conditions of the houses, the cost of refurbishment, and he looked at the viability evidence, which suggested the case for refurbishment certainly wasn't clear. So overall, he did acknowledge the harm to local people and the harm to the assets, but it was outweighed by the benefits of the proposal. So well done, Sasha. No good pretending to me you don't know where Yorkshire is. You were there for the whole of that inquiry. Oh, no, you weren't. You were on the screen.
Thanks, Chris. An amazing achievement of in that case, that Sasha's clients won despite their legal representation. Quite extraordinary. So well done, Sash. Now,
before you move on, I do have Lord Justice Singh's phone number.
He's on the line now. Now I'm going to pass over to Mary, who's going to start and lead our interview with Stephen, which I'm hugely looking forward to. So over to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Stephen, for your patience listening to those summaries. So, first of all, Stephen, give us and the viewers and what is going on in East Riding, and what are the big topics that you are struggling with, grappling with.
Okay, I mean, in terms of East Riding, it may come as a bit of a surprise to many viewers that we are actually one of the biggest planning departments in the country and busiest. We deal with around about 150 applications a week, have a staff of 150 as well. We're a unitary council, which is massively advantageous. So clearly we have all the skills and teams in-house. So planning, landscape, conservation, highways, biodiversity, trees, conservation, etc. So that's advantageous in terms of pulling resources together to deliver sites and determine developments. We're a real mix of urban, rural and coast. Clearly we have a long stretch of coastline on the east coast there, fastest eroding coastline in Northern Europe. So that poses its own challenges, interesting planning challenges in terms of rollback and issues such as that. Huge nature conservation interests here, the Humber Estuary, Bempton Cliffs, which is famous for the puffins, Spurn Point, which I'm sure many viewers may have been to. And we have a huge variety of caseload as well. So, I mean, clearly housing, vitally important. We have a housing figure of 1,400 dwellings per year in the local plan. Lots of big sites, 900 plus coming forward to us, but also real focus on the economy as well. So the M62 corridor along the Humber Estuary is a real focus for employment development. So we have 2 applications pending at the moment. One for May BP on the east side of East Riding, and another on the famous Melton employment site. If both of those are approved, that will be 7,000 to 8,000 new jobs to the East Riding. We've recently granted approval for the government's new super prisons at Phil Sutton. That's outline permission. And we have lots of energy types of developments as well. So a huge proportion of the UK's natural gas comes through the East Riding from the North Sea. We have gas caverns, we have no end of pipelines, we have oil and gas exploration at the moment, and that could well turn to extraction, which clearly will be challenging from a planning perspective if and when those application comes in. And lots of NSIPs. In particular, pipelines, cable routes, that take the energy from the offshore wind farms, Dogger Bank and Hornsey 4, etc. So lots going on, and that's why I stayed here for so long, because there's just such a great diversity of work to be involved in.
I mean, it certainly sounds it. It sounds like a very interesting place to be a lead planning officer. So we've obviously all been living through the COVID pandemic, and we've seen lots of tweaks from government to statutory instruments to planning practice guidance designed to help the planning system through COVID. And I'm interested in your experience from a local planning authority's point of view in the best and the worst of the sort of effects. So what's your experience on the ground, and what do you think are the best and the worst things that you've had to put up with and that you'd like to see perhaps stay as we come out of this?
I think on the whole, local government has reacted really positively to the the pandemic and the crisis. I think I mean, clearly there are over 300 planning departments across the country, so people react in different ways. But I think most planning departments were quite quick off the mark in terms of moving to agile and mobile practices. Many set up planning committees very quickly. We set up, in fact, we never missed a cycle of planning committee. We had teleconference for the first 1 or 2 cycles of committee, and then moved onto Zoom very quickly. So there was no disruption to the service there. I think members have clearly had to take a bit of a leap of faith in terms of getting to grips with technology. Technology is perhaps certainly standard for planning officers, but for members, many of whom in the 70s and 80s, getting to grips with Zoom for planning committee, giving them iPads, giving them laptops to get them set up. That happened very quickly, and members have really grasped that, which is fantastic to see. We did have one interesting moment when one of the committee members was taking part in planning committee live from his tractor in the Yorkshire Wolds. He was quickly told to turn his camera off, but we do have challenges in that sense. And I think the way staff have really just done what they have to do. There's been no grumbles. There were no complaints about still going out on site and working during lockdowns. In fact, we did pause site visits for 2 weeks just so we've got processes in place and health and safety systems in place. And staff were very keen to get back on site straight away. They'd been at home for 2 weeks and were quite keen to get on with the job that they are paid to do. And I think the other thing from local government is that it's not just about, for us, it's not just about planning department. I mean, clearly that's vitally important, but many people are involved in other aspects of dealing with the council's response to the pandemic. So there are staff helping with community hubs, or dealing with phone calls, delivering medicine, delivering food packages, helping with all the various grants to local businesses and issues such as that. So it's a real effort, and clearly from my perspective, planning is vitally important, but we're clearly playing our part to the wider council response as well. So I think that would be my best, bits. In terms of the worst, there has been huge pressure on staff. I do worry about staff well-being in terms of the hours that they work. We do, particularly in this third lockdown with many schools closing, we're not classed as being critical workers, but the planning department, so children should be at home. So we do have the challenge of homeschooling and issues such as that. So we do receive emails from staff at all times of day and night when they work. I'm just going to move because
I mean, I think that is an issue for everybody. That's a very real issue for everybody who's got school-age children at home, and I empathise and sympathise with all of them. I'm so old, I don't have that predicament. Can I just move on then to my next question, which is about the white paper? What horrifies and what excites you most about?
Yeah, in terms of the white paper, I mean, clearly from my perspective, really pleasing that local government is still at the heart of the planning system. And I would question the need for the extent of change. Change is needed, no doubt about it at all. It needs to be streamlined, it needs to be quicker. But when I think the average is that 9 out of 10 decisions are approved, 9 out of 10 are delegated, and 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 appeals are dismissed. And that to me shows that the planning system is by and large working, but clearly does need to be improved in places. In terms of what's been suggested, very comfortable with the concept of growth areas. I don't think that's too dissimilar to what many councils are used to. I like the idea of allocations being given outline planning permission, because that has always been a problem at planning committee when you take an outline application and the members are trying to get back into the nitty gritty of the principle. That's been established. Let's move on. Renewal areas are the side that caused me the greatest concern, simply because of the uncertainty that's currently proposed. Some form of presumption in terms of development. How will that work? Will it be the prior notification process? Will communities understand that? So that causes me some concern, how much scope and role will officers and members have in that process. The local plan timetable, I think, is unrealistic as it's proposed. I agree local plans should be quicker. Ours took 6 years to submission. It needs to be quicker, but I don't think it's deliverable within the time frame that government are setting out in the white paper. Certainly my members have concern in terms of democratic accountability and their perceived reduction in the role of planning committee, perhaps, but I do acknowledge a greater role at the plan making stage. Really supportive of digital. We need to move towards digital. So digital local plans, digital planning application consultation, fantastic. But having also to manage the purse strings, and I'm concerned about the prospect of paying fees back. So how do we plan a planning budget when we may have to plan for, I don't know, 100,000, 200,000 of fees that may be returned if they're not determined on time, and issues such as that.
And what's your view about the increase in practice that we're seeing with the use of prior approvals and permitted development rights? Do you see an increase in your in-tray in applications for prior approvals? And is that a cause of concern, either in terms of sort of reducing democracy and also just in terms of costs?
Yeah, personally, I don't hugely see the value of the prior approvals process. I know why they were introduced. I don't think in many cases they are much quicker than a normal planning application. I think they lead to a lot of confusion. I think there's something like 22, 23 prior approvals around at the moment. We have a matrix that sets out exactly how we consider those. You know, who do we consult? When do we consult? Do we have to put up site notices? Do we consult with neighbours? Clearly, different prior approvals have different processes. They still need to be validated. They still need to be reported at the end of the day. So that costs that's significant work for the council. And many of those prior notifications come with a fee of £96. So by the time it's been validated and perhaps published in some form of consultation, the council's already making a loss in terms of determining that prior approval application.
I've spent 3 hours today talking about a prior approval application, and I can well understand how the fee doesn't cover some of the detail. The next topic is the housing delivery test. We've obviously seen this week the 2020 results. I just wondered, from your point of view, again speaking as a local authority rep, although I can see that East of Riding has done very well, and you're not on the naughty step, as it were. But I just wonder about the utility of the housing delivery test. And do you think that local planning authorities who, for example, have to produce an action plan, or who find themselves on the presumption step, are they taking the results of the housing delivery test seriously? Are they actually acting on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I certainly think something needs to be done in terms of being councils being held to account and assessing performance. So yes, there does need to be some form of test. I think when the housing delivery test was first introduced, the concern that we had was, would it actually penalise councils? There could be councils out there who are doing as much as they possibly can by way of granting permissions, but ultimately we don't deliver the sites, or very few councils deliver the sites. So is there an argument in terms of the councils being penalised for a poor performance from the developers in certain places? I think from my perspective, do we need the housing delivery test and the 5-year land supply test? I mean, you could end up in a confusing situation whereby you pass one but fail the other, which is just ludicrous, and could lead to confusion to all. I think it's useful to focus minds. There needs to be some form of clarity in terms of ensuring that councils do deliver housing, and clearly the bar has now come quite high in terms of when the presumption kicks in at 75%. For us, we did develop an action plan before the test actually came in, because we saw it as being a really proactive way to sell to developers and agents what we had actually trying to do to deliver development. So for us, it's not made a huge difference because we had an action plan in place. I think possibly we need to monitor and update those more regularly. There could be some value in having an action plan as part of a more formal document. Maybe it's a 5-year land supply, maybe it's the 8 councils AMR that we update on a more regular basis. But I do see some value as long as it doesn't sit on the shelf and as long as it's updated on a regular basis.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for answering my questions and sharing your views. I need to open it up now and not hog you. So, Paul, would you like to ask Stephen your question?
Yes, Stephen, I'm going to ask you a question from the audience, but I'm going to explain why I'm asking the question from the audience. I grew up, as you know, in Scarborough, and therefore I regularly used to drive south up Staxton Hill and see the word Humberside. Welcome to Humberside. So one of the consequences of the abolition of that foul southern creation called Humberside, whatever that was, and the restoration of the East Riding of Yorkshire, which is merely 1100 years old, was the creation of both the unitary authority of the East Riding and also the city of Hull. 2 questions, and this is from one of our viewers, Charles Good. To what extent does not having a green belt around Hull and being a unitary authority make meeting housing needs in East Yorkshire more straightforward in planning terms than might be the case for another rural authority adjacent to a big city?
Yeah, I mean, certainly being a unitary is massively beneficial for the reasons I set out at the start, having all the skills in-house and being able to discuss and negotiate within these 4 walls, which is massively positive. I mean, clearly Hull City Council is a separate entity, but we work very closely, as Chris will know, through public inquiries. We have joint background papers, we have joint evidence base, we have a joint spatial plan, not a formal plan, but it's an expression of what our aims and aspirations are across the East Riding and Hull area. And through the last local plan process, we did agree an approach whereby we were meeting needs between both councils across the combined area. So as long as you have those working relationships and prepared to work together, then it can be achieved. And I think we've been pretty successful in being able to do that to date.
Thank you, Stephen. Just had a comment from one of my colleagues just suggesting we might want to reinstate the Kingdom of Northumbria if things keep going downhill, but that's just a thing for the future.
Charlie, what's your question, Charlie?
Thanks, Stephen, I just want to pick up on what you were saying about the prior approval fees being tiny in proportion to the work involved, and really picking up on that and asking about planning application fees, obviously can be considerably bigger. How do you use the planning application fees in order to provide the services that you do?
Yeah. Fees at the moment don't quite cover the cost of the service. We're probably around about 80–90% of fees covering the cost of the service. We do try and diversify things like planning performance agreements and charging for application inquiries, etc., to try and boost the income. But it's difficult at the moment. The planning system, the public purse is subsidising elements of the planning system. The 20% increase in planning fees back in 2018 was for me, it was around about £450,000 per year. So we've invested that very heavily in new posts, new staff, training opportunities. We have around about a dozen people going on various courses at the moment, either the MRTPI apprenticeships or surveying courses and issues such as that. We've invested in the IT. But there needs to be more. Good planning departments do need more resources if we are to deliver the speed of change and the quality of service that clearly government wants us to deliver.
Can I just ask a rider on that? Sorry, but Robert has asked a really interesting sort of follow rider question on that, which is, the implications of the white paper proposed. I mean, do you worry about the resource implications of what's proposed for our brave new world?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, clearly the cost of at the local plan stage, if you start to factor in master planning and design briefs and design codes, etc., is significant. I mean, I talked about the size of East Riding earlier. 330 towns and villages that we have now. Clearly, we won't have a design code or master plan for each one, but we're going to have a good level of distinctiveness between various parts of the East Riding, that is an absolutely huge task. So that's a concern. If there are fewer plan applications coming in, if they're either through an automatic permission or through prior notification, then clearly the application fee income will drop as well. So the white paper misses out so much detail, so it's difficult to be too certain. But yes, that is a concern in terms of how the departments will be funded moving forward.
Thank you. Sorry, Mary, after you.
That's all right, no worries. Sasha, your question?
Thank you very much, Mary. Stephen, from your perspective, do you have a sense that do you feel that the government have an understanding of the problems and pressures that local government face, in particular planning face? Do you feel that's taken on board currently or not?
That's a really difficult question now, because I suppose national government, a bit like local government, when we determine applications, there's so many different competing interests that you have to take into account, that clearly you can never please everybody or deal with the interest of just one individual group or a group of people. I think clearly the answer that I would give is that I would want more weighting provided to local government views and concerns. I'm pleased that MHCLG, I think, are more visible now than they perhaps were in the past. It's great that they come to lots of meetings, seminars, lots of the planning advisory service meetings, which is really positive and take feedback. What I do miss the old government office system. We used to have a really good way in to discuss with the government office any issues that we had at a national level. So we used to go through to Leeds and speak with planning colleagues there. That would then be fed back down to London. So I think we've lost that interface, which is a real shame. But government are saying the right things in terms of promising to fund the planning system. So that's my key message today, and I hope that's what they do deliver on.
And last but by no means least, Chris, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, please. Yes, and it is just as well I go last, Mary, because the last time I started asking Stephen questions, it lasted 2.5 days. Do you remember that? Now, and I'll just say quickly, I disagree about any confusion about the housing delivery test. That's about your past performance, and 5-year land supply is about your future supply. What's wrong with testing you against both of those? But my question is sort of tied to that. It's about supply. East Riding, you got your plan adopted, and it contains a significant number of allocations in a whole variety of settlements, but some of those haven't come forward. A few names, land north of Well Lane, Willoughby, land off Ferriby High Road, haven't got planning applications. South of Purton Road, you're going to recognise some of those, I think. Now, they're chosen, you engage with the community, you chose those sites in full consultation with the community. And if the local community choose the sites, they don't always choose the sites that are so obviously deliverable. And some of them are not being delivered, even though they've been in your plan for a while. So my question is, don't you think we should have reserved sites? Because you said, oh, it's not our fault if the sites don't get developed. We've had a chat about that before. Okay, if it's not your fault and there are problems and difficulties, what's wrong with having a 30% set of reserved sites? And if you don't need them and the sites get delivered, great. But if there are problems with the site, why not tap into the reserved sites?
I feel like I've been whisked back by 6 years, Chris. and I could give you an update on those 3 sites, but clearly it's not relevant today. But I mean, in terms of having an over allocation, I think yes, that is a way forward. Many local plans will have tens of sites. Some, like us, will have hundreds of sites. And with the best will in the world, circumstances change. A developer will have a change in business priorities or commercial priorities. A landowner, a farm may be passed down a generation, and the new landowner may not wish to develop the land. So things are going to change, and when preparing a long-term plan, you cannot foresee some of those issues. So I agree there needs to be flexibility. I don't like the concept of reserved sites, because quite frankly, if you're saying that a site is suitable in principle for development, but allocating it as a reserved site, I think it's difficult then to resist if an application comes in sooner than you would have anticipated it going forward, because you've said already it's a suitable site. My preference would just be to over allocate by a certain percentage and have a buffer and that the market forces bring the sites forward to achieve the housing figure that we have. 30% is clearly way too high, and the figure would be to be negotiated with the local plans process. But the concept of having an over allocation, I agree with. And in terms of the community aspect, then isn't that a fundamental part of the planning system, which is consultation with everybody, including the local communities? And you know, what I always say to my planning officers, both on the policy side and the development management side, is play every single case with a straight bat. Don't pander to the local community. Don't pander to the landowner with expensive consultants and an expensive barrister. You know, we have to consider sites on a case-by-case basis and put forward what we think we can justify. Otherwise, we'll get into all sorts of mess further down the line. Yeah,
well, you know, look, democracy is important, as everybody who voted for President Trump would say.
Stephen, thank you very much, Stephen. You played that with very professionally, despite the provocation. You are a credit to your profession, and thank you very much. Back to you, Charlie.
Thanks, Mary, and heartfelt thanks from me too to Stephen. Champion of the week next up, and I'm doing that. Tempted to make it the two new presidents, of course, the president of the United States of America, Joe Biden, and the new president of the RTPI, Dr. Wei Yang. But I'll give them honourable mentions. My champion is Gary, or Sir Gary Hickinbottom. Until this week, Lord Justice Hickinbottom, author or co-author of numerous High Court and Court of Appeal judgments on planning law, such as Heathrow expansion, the St Ives second homes ban, judgments like Gallagher on housing land supply, SEA, tilted balance, and so on. He's taken early retirement this week, which at least to me came as something out of the blue. Early for judges, at least, at the age of 65, which is a mere spring chicken, given that judges can carry on till they're 70, or in some of the earlier ones, 75. He's one of the most pleasant and engaging judges any lawyer, or indeed anyone attending court, would have come across, with an inspirational backstory, having come from humble beginnings to be a partner in a law firm, then a parking adjudicator, rose all the way up from being a parking adjudicator, social security judge, circuit judge, and then High Court and Court of Appeal. And his contribution to planning case law has been considerable and will be much missed. I'm not just saying that because I'm waiting for a judgment from him and hoping he's listening, I should clarify. On the bright side, he's just been appointed, having retired, to do an investigation relating to some goings on in the BVI. The second planning Court of Appeal judge we've mentioned in 2 weeks, who has a Caribbean link, and I hope for his sake, once again, just as with Keith Lindblom, that that requires a trip to the jurisdiction to check it out. So that's my champion of the week, and back to you, Mary. We're doing a bit of ping pong to each other. Back to you to tell us nudge of the week.
Yes, you're getting a little bit sycophantic. You've got to be careful there, Charlie. Nudge of the week, right? All those councils, whether you're in the presumption category or whether you're in the action plan category, I'm nudging you all to make sure that you take the necessary action following the housing delivery test. Thank you very much.
Mary, before you go on, I just want to say one thing. I think I want to have an unofficial nudge for everyone to listen to Amanda Gorman, who was the young 22-year-old who gave that poem yesterday.
Mm-hmm. It's glorious. I agree.
Speech, a 22-year-old who's just left university, and it was incredible.
And can I just say, the nudge of the week really should have been to me, because I should have intervened and objected to Chris's question to Stephen, and we would have really been back in the Melton inquiry from 6 years ago. Sorry about that, Stephen.
You did that lots. But look, Stephen, actually, one of the reasons we got you on the show is that young planners need to see inspirational leaders in planning getting to the top of their job, and you certainly do that. You completely live and breathe your plan, your community. You were an exceptional witness, tricky, but exceptional. And, you know, you are a real model to all those people who want to climb to the top of local authority and do what you do. So I fully applaud you.
Completely agree. Well, with that, how best to close? Thank you again, Stephen. We're hugely grateful to have your insights. About time we had an LPA head of planning insights, so we're really, really very, very grateful indeed. Back next week, same time, same place, and we can confirm, I think, can't we, now that next week we're going to be having George Clark, the TV presenter and architect, best known for the Home Show, Restoration Man, and George's amazing spaces. One of the things that Stephen was telling me the other day, one of the things that he's done is fairly recently is something in the East Riding in Pocklington, which I've got on my hit list of things to watch this weekend when I'm not wading through core documents. So George will be joining us next week, Thursday, the 28th of January at 5 p.m. We hope you can join us for that. Thanks again.
Charlie, before you go, Victoria Hills of the RTPI has just said, Stephen, when are you standing for RTPI president?
You can tell us after we finish. Thank you all. Good night. Take care. Enjoy your tea, Mary. And I've got 119 tea bags left to drink between this time and next week. And see you next week, everybody. Take care. Goodbye. Cheers.
Thanks, Stephen.